on this Thursday night. That was quick.
I am resigning.
Liz Truss makes history for the shortest, most chaotic tenure as British Prime Minister. And let us rejoice, the comedy that comes from political crisis.
We need satire.
The race to be BC's next premier becomes a one-man show.
Let her run!
Why the only other contender was disqualified. Emotional final farewell.
You are my hero.
2 Ontario police officers are laid to rest.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. They say a week is a long time in politics. In the UK, that could be shortened to just a day. The country is about to get yet another prime minister. 24 hours ago, Liz Truss said she was a fighter, not a quitter. Today, she quit. Since Truss took over the Tory party in early September and met the late Queen Elizabeth, it has all been downhill. Her plan for billions in unfunded tax cuts backfired, rejected by the markets and her own party, causing the pound to crash, threatening the stability of the country. Her own political future reduced to ridicule. One tabloid setting up this webcam and asking, will Liz Truss outlast this lettuce? Well, the answer was a resounding no. Today, the lettuce rejoiced. In the end, it was the Tory party who ousted Truss. They'd anointed her after the party kicked out Boris Johnson in July. Well, tonight, his name is back in the news in what is an extraordinary revolving door of Tory prime ministers. Our Crystal Goomansingh begins our coverage tonight from London. Crystal.
Donna, people are calling the political upheaval here in the UK everything from calamitous, disastrous, even an utter shame. You would think after nearly 1,000 years, British Parliament would have seen everything, but this is a first. Liz Truss took power touting her bold economic plan to grow the economy. She leaves admitting she was ineffective.
And we set out a vision for a low-tax, high-growth economy that would take advantage of the freedoms of Brexit. I recognise, though, given the situation, I cannot deliver the mandate on which I was elected by the Conservative Party.
Her political downfall comes just 6 weeks after her government's mini-budget tanked markets. Featuring sweeping trickle-down tax reforms with breaks for the wealthy, it was pitched with little explanation as to how it would be financed. The British Tories chose her as their leader only in September, but Truss never enjoyed deep support from her colleagues or the public.
Mr. Speaker, I am a fighter and not a quitter.
A day later, she accepted her fate.
I am resigning as leader of the Conservative Party.
Reaction has been robust.
Whoever replaces her to act on the climate crisis, the cost of living and the energy crisis.
We need a general election because it's just a cycle of rubbish and they replace rubbish with more rubbish.
But you know what they say about one man's trash.
Hasta la vista, baby. Thank you.
Boris Johnson himself resigned and said goodbye under a cloud of hostility and scandal. But he is one name being floated as a possible nominee. As is Rishi Sunak, the candidate pushed aside just last month in favor of Truss. Candidates need the backing of 100 MPs in order to be considered.
Well, it's an absolute disgrace. It makes you wonder whether they should vote Conservative again.
This country's seen so much instability over the last couple of years.
Crystal, Liz Truss didn't have a mandate from the people. She was chosen by the party. The last Tory leader to win an election, a majority, is Boris Johnson. Could he really make a comeback?
Well, Donna, given what we've seen over the last couple of months, no one is ruling anything out. Boris Johnson is out of the country on holiday, so we haven't heard from him directly. But he has his supporters. So many people, including voters, are saying they want Boris back. Now, it is worth mentioning he is still facing an investigation by the Parliamentary Standards Committee because potentially that he misled Parliament. And he resigned because there was a party revolt. A record number of ministers and MPs resigned, saying that he was unfit. Now, who will lead the party. We don't have to wait that long to find out who the next Prime Minister will be. At the earliest, we could know on Monday when the nominations closed. At the latest, we'll find out on Friday who the next Prime Minister will be. Donna?
Right. Crystal Goomansingh in London, thanks. Well, the race is underway to choose a new Prime Minister, but the political crisis in the UK has left the country almost completely paralysed at a time when there is real economic turmoil and a lack of faith in public institutions, not only there, but across the world. The days of cool Britannia and being a model of stability are gone. Now, as Eric Sorensen reports, Britain is giving the world a lesson in what not to do.
Our country will be stronger if we stay.
Almost a decade ago, Conservative Prime Minister David Cameron promised a referendum to unite his party, his country, and remain in the EU. It led to just the opposite, Brexit, and out he went.
I expect to go to the palace and offer my resignation.
I will shortly leave the job.
Theresa May fared no better, and by the time Boris Johnson took over, the party embraced Brexit.
Deliver Brexit.
Johnson was a great salesman, but Brexit, built on misleading promises, led to headaches with trade and travel, migrant workers and labour shortages, and the Irish border. The UK emerged from the pandemic less resilient than its former EU partners. Over 3 years, the Eurozone economy grew almost 2%, while the UK economy shrank. In the G7, the US and Canada led the way, the UK at the bottom, the only G7 country with a smaller GDP than before COVID-19.
Within the Conservative Party spectacularly failed because of the Tories, because of Brexit. The UK has become politically Italy without the weather or the food.
Britain, a global leader in finance, the Conservatives, a reputation for fiscal management. But amid rampant inflation, Liz Truss pushed tax cuts that only fueled more inflation.
Do you feel like you've been betrayed by the Prime Minister?
Global confidence crumbled. Her Chancellor of the Exchequer was forced out, and soon Truss herself was gone. In just 6 years, the UK Conservatives have cycled through 4 Prime Ministers, soon to be 5, a breathtaking political turnover. Even Tories are appalled, one telling the BBC,
"It is a pitiful reflection on the Conservative Parliamentary Party at every level."
In a time of global tension, allies yearn for that UK steadiness to return.
Il est important que la Grande-Bretagne retrouve très vite une stabilité politique.
It is important for Britain to regain political stability, said France's Emmanuel Macron. That's all I want. With Conservative popularity disintegrating, this man, the Labour Party's Keir Starmer, is now favoured to win the next election.
This is not just a soap opera at the top of the Tory party. It's doing huge damage to our economy and to the reputation of our country.
Starmer may not get the quick election he wants, but his message is resonating.
Economic credibility gone.
Eric Sorensen, Global News.
Back here in Canada, British Columbia is getting a new premier, the province's former Attorney General David Eby. The process has not been without controversy. After weeks of discussion, the BC NDP voted to disqualify Eby's only opponent. Neetu Garcha is following this story for us. Neetu.
Donna, this has been quite the political storm. Today, outgoing Premier John Horgan was asked why the list of BC NDP executive members who voted to disqualify Anjali Appadurai isn't being made public, and he was clearly frustrated over what he calls harassment by the BC Green Party. Take a listen.
Why? Because they're being inundated by people who say this is by Green Party members saying we want to take over your party. I'm sure you can find their names on the website. If you want their addresses and phone numbers and emails, you're going to have to do something else, not talk to me. I think I'm done here. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
I'll see you around.
That is how what was perhaps his final news conference as BC's premier ended. Here's how the party got to this point.
After nearly 4 hours, 40 members of the BC NDP executive decided to disqualify Anjali Appadurai.
Members across the country have spoken up on Twitter, urging the provincial executive to let the leader of the next leader of the BC NDP be chosen by members, not decided behind closed doors.
The 32-year-old climate activist who's never held office was trying to pull off an upset when she joined the campaign to become the next leader of BC.
This whole colonial structure.
The only other candidate for the top job, frontrunner David Eby, the 46-year-old lawyer and former attorney general who entered the bid with the near unanimous support of his caucus, said he's focused on his campaign.
Simply because this leadership race is over does not mean that
the issue of climate change goes away. And I know that was a huge priority for her.
After Apatarai quickly gained so much member support, many thought the politically unbelievable could actually happen. She threatened to derail Eby's acclamation as NDP leader.
Let her run!
Apatarai's bid was halted late Wednesday night, with the party brass claiming she improperly used third parties for her membership drive, including a nonprofit called Dogwood, describing itself as BC's largest nonpartisan citizen action network. Apatarai saying the rules were changed and applied to her campaign retroactively. Premier John Horgan announced in June he was stepping down mid-term, kickstarting the race. At a news conference Thursday, he said he offers his full support to the last remaining candidate in the leadership race.
I am confident that the work of the table officers and the executive of the BC NDP have been thorough.
The controversy highly damaging to the party in charge of what had been one of the most stable provincial governments in Canada.
And with Apatarai out, David Eby will be declared leader tomorrow before he's sworn in at a later date, as questions grow over whether it's time for Elections BC to start supervising these party leadership races. Donna?
All right, Neethu Garsha in Burnaby, BC. Thanks. A top intelligence officer with the Ontario Provincial Police says his force did not find any evidence the so-called freedom protest in Ottawa earlier this year was a national security threat. OPP Superintendent Pat Morris testified today at the public inquiry reviewing the federal government's decision to invoke the Emergencies Act. David Aiken reports on what he and other officers had to say.
Is it fair to say that at no point during the convoy protest did you receive reliable intelligence that would lead you to conclude that there was a risk to national security that would rise above the potential threat to national security that you identified in that report?
That's correct. Ontario Provincial Police Superintendent Bill Morris confirmed that convoy protesters in Ottawa and elsewhere in the province had the potential to be a threat, but they did not find evidence of violence caused by extremism.
Everybody was asking about extremism. We weren't seeing much evidence of it.
That could be important testimony, since the federal government cited threats to national security by potential violent extremists as one of the reasons it invoked the Emergencies Act on February the 14th. But one of the most senior Ottawa police officers to take the stand so far testified that the powers police were given as a result of the Federal Emergencies Act helped clear the protest.
Yes, I think it assisted. I would say grease the wheels of the plan that we had in place.
Among other things, the Emergencies Act gave police the power to commandeer tow trucks, and Ottawa police put those and other powers to use.
The Emergencies Act made us more confident in the approach we were taking and enabled us to, get past the issues of whether it was the seizing of assets. I think that was helpful in terms of setting a tone for some of the people who may be deterred by that.
Still, under cross-examination by lawyers representing those who thought the invocation of the Emergencies Act was not warranted, Ottawa's deputy chief conceded that the powers given to police under that act were, quote, useful but not necessary. Donna.
All right, David, thanks. There are some new developments from the inquiry into the Nova Scotia mass shootings. Audio recordings of a phone call between RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki and the Nova Scotia RCMP have been released. Conversations that might hold a link to allegations the Liberal government interfered in the investigation to try to advance its agenda on gun control. Ross Lord has more on this tonight. Ross.
Donna, we only have partial transcripts and recordings of Commissioner Lucki's notorious meeting with Nova Scotia RCMP personnel, but they do include several references to government officials. Both Commissioner Lucki and then Public Safety Minister Bill Blair deny there was political interference, but the contents of her phone call with Nova Scotia Mounties suggest there was regular contact. Lucki has acknowledged being frustrated. A news release from Nova Scotia RCMP excluded details of the Portapic killer's weapons. She denies allegations that she was crossing ethical boundaries and trying to boost public support for the government's gun control agenda.
There was a request that I got from the minister's office, and I shared with the minister that in fact it was going to be in the news release, and it wasn't.
As Nova Scotia Mounties and Lucki's own communications staffers explain how chaotic their jobs became after the massacre, Lucky makes another reference suggesting they let down the government.
Not being able to come through for the minister on the simplest of requests.
Commissioner Lucky also expressed frustration that there was not a detailed timeline of the massacre released sooner, because she was eager to provide it for the Prime Minister before he heard it through the media. Donna?
All right, Ross Lord in Halifax, thank you. Next, the demands for answers over the shocking suggestions made to a veteran suffering in silence. Canada's Veterans Affairs Minister is before a committee today related to a shocking story Global News broke in August. A Canadian Forces veteran seeking treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder was offered medical assistance in dying. Today was the first time the minister, Lawrence Macaulay, talked publicly about what happened. Mercedes Stevenson was listening. Mercedes.
Donna, a veteran came forward to us at Global News after a Veterans Affairs employee offered him, as you mentioned, medical assistance in dying as an alternative to treating his PTSD and traumatic brain injury he suffered in Afghanistan. The veteran told us that it was raised out of nowhere and repeatedly by the employee, and that he felt pressured. The VAC employee also mentioned helping another veteran with MAID. That launched an investigation into whether this was a systemic problem. At committee, Minister Lawrence Macaulay condemned what happened, but often seemed to shunt responsibility to his department as the opposition demanded answers.
When we're talking about a situation where a veteran comes crying for help to Veterans Affairs and is instead suggested that maybe you should consider killing yourself, that's, to me, sounds like it should be a high priority to deal with.
But this was a mistake, and it was wrong, and it was unacceptable, and whatever word she could use, it's totally wrong in every way. But what you do when this comes up is that you put a training program in place. It will probably include more than that, but that's not the field that I'm in. I'm to make sure that this is properly investigated, dealt with.
Now, when it comes to that investigation, Macaulay says that this was an isolated incident, but it's not clear how that's been determined when the department says the investigation is still ongoing. So far, they found no other examples. The employee in question is still working at VAC, but no longer has direct contact with veterans. Employees have also been told they cannot raise MAID, but feelings of betrayal cut deeply in the veteran community, and concern about death by suicide among veterans makes this an issue that is just that much more painful. Donna?
Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa, thank you. Headley frontman Jacob Hogard has been granted bail as he appeals a conviction for sexual assault. Earlier today, the singer was sentenced to 5 years in prison for sexually assaulting a woman in a Toronto hotel room in 2016. Hogard was previously found not guilty of sexual assault causing bodily harm related to the case of a teenaged fan. Heartbreaking goodbyes. Coming up, the funeral for 2 Ontario police officers. Two Ontario police officers killed in the line of duty last week were laid to rest today. It was a private funeral attended by close family, dignitaries, police, and emergency service personnel. Constable Morgan Russell was a 33-year veteran with the South Simcoe Police. Constable Devon Northrup spent 6 years with the force. Both are being remembered as respected members of the community who embodied integrity, courage, and compassion, and their families say they had the biggest hearts.
The time we did have together was pure joy, with more happiness and love than anyone will ever know.
I will love you forever, and you are my hero. I pray that no one else has to go through this. I wish I still had him here, but I'm so lucky to have had him for 25 years. I love you, Daddy, forever.
The 2 officers were fatally shot October 11th while responding to a call in the small town of Innisfil, Ontario. Let us rejoice. Next, finding comedy gold in the UK political crisis. It's not polite to laugh at others' misfortune, but laugh at yourself? Well, the British are doing a lot of that right now, along with a lot of swearing and lots of head shaking. The political crisis in the UK is serious business, of course, but satirists and comedians are making the most of it, especially that victorious head of lettuce. Heather Yourex-West takes a look at the lighter side of the political turmoil.
This is beginning. Let us rejoice.
With a veggie victorious, the British public can only remain calm and try turning over a new leaf. Social media users have had a field day.
With a situation as chaotic and nonsensical as this, we need satire, firstly, as a coping mechanism.
Because the news itself has been a little bananas.
It has been a night of astonishing scenes at Westminster. The Deputy Chief Whip was reported to have left the scene saying, "I'm absolutely effing furious. I just don't effing care anymore," before he resigned.
That's the nightly news right now. The headlines echoing everywhere. Here's Germany.
Das Parlament mit den Worten verließ, "I'm effing furious and I don't care anymore."
As a satirist, you use absurdity to point out what's actually happening. But when what's actually happening is so absurd that you can't out-absurd it, it does become a bit of a challenge.
It can be hard to tell truth from satire these days. Liz Truss resigns after a long, illustrious reign of power spanning 2 monarchs, while memes like these flood social feeds.
Social media has been on fire, hasn't it? I mean, this is something that us Brits do best. It's always been a way of kind of tackling very serious issues through comedy. And of course, if you actually look at it, it's not really funny.
It's the old expression. I mean, if you're not laughing, you're crying. And I think as every day there is more and more to be upset about and worried about, if you can find some catharsis in comedy, then that's amazing.
Who gets the last laugh? Not Truss's biographers. Their book on her rise to power isn't out for another 6 weeks. Heather Yourex-West, Global News.
That's Global National for this Thursday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is McGill University in Montreal. We'd love to see your Canada. Please email it to us. And thanks for watching. Farah Nasser will be at the anchor desk tomorrow, and I'll see you Saturday for the new reality. Bye-bye.